Welcome to Hello Main Street. I'm your host, Monica Sanchez, and here we talk about thought provoking tips, tricks, and ideas for fellow entrepreneurs just like you. So, welcome once again. We have today where we're going to be talking about end of life, and Kathy Bray is here with us. She is the owner of While We're Still Here. So let's dive right in. And Kathy, welcome, a fellow podcaster, which I'm very excited about. We've already kind of shared some information with one another, but go ahead and tell us a little bit about you.
Sure, thanks. And thanks for having me today, Monica. Yes, I am a podcaster. I have been in the end of life stage, I guess, end of life, what's the word, arena for probably almost 12 years. I have a strong medical background, and I got into podcasting because one of my clients retired a year earlier than he told me he was going to retire. And I felt myself going, what am I going to do with my time? Not just to mention the income reduction, but what do I do now?
Yeah.
And I started kind of going inward to myself. What's my experience? What's my knowledge? What can I use that I already have on board without having to go to a new school program or anything of that nature?
Sure.
And I've got all this information about end of life, and I've wanted to share it for so long. A friend of mine said, well, podcast, blah, blah, blah. And I went, oh. And then she
Yeah.
said, and if you're going to do a podcast, you better get a website. So I also started a website and a blog on the same weekend that I became a podcaster.
Oh wow! So you dove in head first and everything all at the same time. Kudos to you, because usually people kind of piece it out, right? So
Nah, not this
great.
time.
Yeah. So tell me now, you're an end of life doula. So what does that all encompass?
Well, particularly for myself and the training that I have undertaken, it's got 3 arms, which this year they're turning into one big program. But the first part of that is an elder care companion, where I can help someone in the later years of their life by running errands for them. If they're alone, we go on outings together, just develop a trusting relationship. And then I can go to doctor's appointments, take notes for the family, just to keep people informed and to ask those questions that some folks forget to ask. The second arm is is an end-of-life doula or death doula. Doula
Okay.
being the word for caregiver. And
Hmm.
historically, that has been known as a birth doula,
Sure.
where a care provider goes in, helps the pregnant mom and the new baby. For myself, it's helping someone when they've received a terminal diagnosis. And so I can go in and I can kind of be a calming presence for the client and their family. I can
Yeah.
answer questions about the phases of death. I can be present at the bedside. I can help create funerals. I can do pretty much whatever that family feels that they need at the time. I am
Mm.
non-medical, however, so I don't get involved with really important to point out. The last arm is the advanced care planning specialist, and that is someone who helps with the advanced directive that everyone needs to have in case that they are found or are taken to the hospital and are unable to speak for themselves. The advanced care plan tells the doctors what you want in terms of CPR or oxygen, etc., and what you do not want. Partnering with that
Okay.
is the healthcare proxy.
Okay, that's great. So, Kathy, when you're talking about the healthcare plan, advanced care planning specialist, and yes, I agree. Everybody should have one. How do you know whether you have one or not? And if you don't, how is that process? What does that process look like to actually make sure that you have that in place? And I think about people who, like myself, I'm sandwich generation. So I have
Mhm.
young children, not too young, but anyways, I have children, and then I have my mom, right? So I'm like, do I have that in place? I don't even know. And I think maybe my husband would need it for me and vice versa.
I almost think you would know if you had one because of what it takes to fill one out. Now,
Okay.
having said that, the way that I work an advanced care plan is different than what an estate attorney would do. An estate attorney will hand you a form that says, I want hydration, I don't want hydration, I want CPR, I don't want CPR,
Mm.
and I want a healthcare proxy. And then you just sign it and it goes in your will, your file, and you don't see it again.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
advanced care directive that I provide is what's known
Mhm.
as a subjective advanced care directive,
Mhm.
advanced directive. I want nutrition. I don't want nutrition. And I don't want artificial hydration, or I do want artificial hydration. I want to be put on a ventilator, or I don't want to be put on a ventilator.
Mm.
When we
Mhm.
go through the question and answer period to lead up to signing this document, it can be well, let's see, I just completed one with a client, and I would
Okay.
say she and I spent 6 hours together before she ever even presented it to her family, and then it was
Mm.
another 2 hours with her family, because these decisions are not easy. You think it is, "Oh, well, I
Right.
definitely don't want that," until you start thinking about what that really means at the end of your life.
Right. Yeah. And it can be very emotional. I remember when I was with my attorney and we were updating our wills and just thinking about the small things, which is I have a child under 18, who's going to care for her, and do they give consent to be her guardian? And so yeah, and that was a small piece, and that for me that was just emotional. So I can't even imagine what it would feel like, being thinking about my own mortality and then those specifics, and then having to relay that to my family and say these are my wishes, as I
Mhm.
progress or what have you.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is very emotional. To be honest with you, I'm gonna tell you that part of my training required that I updated my advanced directive. I'm grateful that I did, because I have the standard boilerplate one, and I have some special instructions that I wanted to include. But then I started putting so many caveats on it. Well, I'll accept this treatment for this long, and I'll accept that treatment, or I won't have this except for this scenario. And it became so twisted, I realized I am not ready to fill this out yet. And I needed to
Yeah.
set it aside.
Yeah. So is there a way, you talked about a boilerplate, Kathy, and is there a way to get like a template to at least start looking about what does that look like, for a person, my own personal needs or family's personal needs? I do know of somebody right now who they're kind of going through that process at the moment. And I think that would be something that would be helpful for the both of them, because then they can be both on the same page, right?
And that's important. It is absolutely important, because the person who is going to voice your decisions needs to understand what it is you want, and they need to be willing to do that for you. And it can be very volatile. It can be extremely emotional and chaotic. So to do that ahead of time is super important. So yes, to your question as to the availability of a template, every state has their own form.
Mm-hmm.
In the state of Washington, it's called an advanced directive, or
Okay.
a durable power, and then there's a durable power of attorney for healthcare. So one of them is that you fill out, these are what you want, and then the healthcare proxy is what the state of Washington calls that durable power of attorney for healthcare. Excuse me, I misspoke. Healthcare agent in the state of Washington. I've been saying proxy for agent. And the healthcare agent is not the one making decisions for you, although every single form that you read will say that that's what's happening. What they are actually doing is speaking the decisions that you have already made yourself in your advanced directive.
Okay. That's good to know. And then
Mhm,
let's go back, Kathy, if you don't mind. You talk about the end of life doula.
mhm.
And so are you there 24/7? How does that work? Is that something that Medicare or Medicaid would pay for? Or is this something that private pay only offers?
Presently, it's not regulated by any federal organization, so it is not covered by any insurance. The National Council on Palliative Care and Hospice has accepted doula care as a legitimate form of care, And so we are in the process, doulas and those who are working at the legislative level are trying to get some regulations in place so that insurances will pay. So right now it's private pay. Many of the doulas, including myself, offer many charitable or complimentary items as part of our service.
Okay.
And as far as 24/7, no. And I think, well, let me correct that. So hospice, when they come in to take care of a family, will come once a week. There will be a nurse, and they are trying to teach the family all about what's happening in the very beginning of a diagnosis. And the family is turned upside down, and then they leave after their hour. And then a social work might come for an hour, and then they leave. And we're talking in a span of a week that there might be 3 hours of a hospice visit. And I'm not putting hospice down. They were tremendous for my family and me, and I learned so much. But I kept wondering why we didn't have more of them. And it's because it's just not possible in the way that we have our medical world set up here in the United States. So a doula's job, a doula's role is to stand in the gap. And the family can ask the doula to come in, and I would say a minimum of 2 hours for every visit, because you need that time to catch up from the previous visit. And then you need just some time to figure out what's going on and assess any safety issues or any change in the patient's status. But I could stay for 6 hours. And if the patient is about to die, I would stay until that patient did actually pass, if that's what the family wanted. And that could be hours to days.
Yeah. Okay. And that's good to know, because I mean, I had my dad who 8 years ago, he was ill, diagnosed, and a couple of different things that you really pinpointed out that I wish that we would have had, because at that point my parents hadn't shared the information with me and my siblings. And so they thought that it was curable had my dad had a surgery procedure. And then I had went with them because I'm like, I just want to be involved in this process, and supportive to both my parents as to whatever it is they wanted to do. But I was the one who heard the word terminal, and I'm like, okay, wait, hold on. We only hear what we want to hear. And so I'm glad I was in the room at that point in time, because my parents never heard that word when they were meeting with the doctors. And so I feel like having a doula, you can set your emotions aside because you're like that third party advocating for that person. So I think that would have been wonderful. And then the other part that you mentioned about end-of-life doula is, for us, like, we were doing round the care caretaking for my dad, my mom, and myself. And yeah, you're right. The people who came in, they were great. They were only came in for 1 to 2 hours, like you mentioned, which was good, but we weren't in the medical field, so we were left to figure it out for ourselves, all the in between stuff. So it would be nice to be able to say, if we have a resource such as the end-of-life doula, to say, okay, we need extra and we need that expert to come in, because this is not our area of expertise. I'm an admin person. I'm not a caretaker. I'm not in the medical field. So I feel I can see where the value is to have an end-of-life doula. And so let's talk about, Kathy, about your podcast, because you've had your podcast for now how long?
Oh, I'm beginning my 3rd year.
Good for you. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Thanks.
And so what type of topics do you discuss on there?
Well, for the first year, we talked about what is active listening. I did a several episode series on thanatology, which is the study of death. And I really was excited about that because it taught me a lot, even though I've been in this space for years.
Sure.
And then, just how to have conversations, how to be a support and not just shut conversation down when somebody really needs to share something important.
Yeah.
And then year 2 was, let's have some conversations. So I actually began interviewing some folks. I did 1 interview a month, and it was just different walks of life, different aspects. One of my interviews was with somebody whose mother did the medical aid in dying, in which they take a cocktail of medication, which lets them die in a very short amount of time, that they choose the date and the time. That was a really important one for me because I had not really spoken to anyone about that process. So that one's a special one to me. And then all of them were important for some reason or another.
Sure. And that's interesting, being able to choose when you're going to go. I didn't realize that you could do that in Washington State, so I learned something.
Only 11 states in the country right now do it.
Okay, that's good to know. And then, so Kathy, tell us, what is one thing that you want listeners to take away from this conversation that we're having?
It's very easy for me to sit here and say, don't be afraid of talking about death. What I would say is learn to be brave enough and courageous enough to tell the people that you care about what you would like to do at the end of your life, where you might want to live, and how to make those arrangements before a diagnosis is given. The chaos that happens, and I was one of those people. My mother was given a diagnosis that is very well known to be 6 months or less. She happened to live a couple of months longer than that. We were not prepared for any of what was to come. And I lived 2 hours away from her, and I was her main caregiver. It was a lot.
Yeah.
And hospice was wonderful, but at 3:00 in the morning when I was stressing out, while they would answer the phone, I didn't always feel comfortable picking up the phone and making those phone calls.
Yeah. And because, one, we don't want to be a burden on others and feel like, even though it's a burning question for us at 3 a.m, it's like maybe not the right time. There's a lot of questions and a lot of foggy moments. I know that for sure, when you're going through it. But thank you so much, Kathy, for coming on. I really am excited that you and we've gotten to meet, we've gotten to talk, and really get to know this. I think it's an important topic because mortality is not something that people like to talk about. I know when I was selling life insurance, nobody wanted to know that, but it's a guarantee we're all going to die, right? So
100%.
We should be talking about it.
Yes.
So absolutely. And so thank you so much for being here. If you're interested, please reach out to Kathy. Her information is down below. She would love to talk with you. She's located in Tri-Cities, so here in Central Washington, as always. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, please like and share it. The more that we can get positive feedback out there, the more that we can help one another. And as you know, we are always better together. Again, my information is listed down below. I am found on LinkedIn, Monica Sanchez, B2B. Thank you. And thank you, Kathy, so much once again for being here with us. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Monica. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you and just be a part of your podcast.